Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And just like I'm going to be doing throughout the rest of this year and more than likely the majority of next year, I'm going through all of the Disney animated films. And today I'm doing the 1950 film Cinderella. Here is your trivia question for today. Cinderella is the one who names the mice, but when she names Gus, this is just a nickname. What is the actual name she gives him? The answer will be at the end of this episode. In the film Cinderella, we head off to a chateau, where within it we meet our cast of characters. We meet Lady Tremaine, who is the matriarch of the family and quite a cruel woman. Then there are her rude and repugnant daughters, Anastasia and Drizella. The last member of this family is the stepdaughter, Cinderella. You see, when she was much younger, her father, not wanting her to be alone, decided to get remarried to Lady Tremaine and have them all become a family. Unfortunately, though, Cinderella's father passed away, and then she was left with this horrid family. Her stepmother and stepsisters treat her like a maid and a housekeeper. Now, luckily, though, Cinderella is not completely alone. She does have some animal companions, where quite a few of them are very friendly, while some of them, on the other hand, are downright mean. Now, within the same land that our family lives in, there is a palace, and within this palace is the king. And he is currently dealing with a dilemma where he wants his son, the prince, to get married and give him grandchildren, but he seems to have no interest in going this path. So the king has the idea to host a ball where all of the eligible women in the land will come and meet the prince. So this, of course, means that Lady Tremaine and her two daughters will be attending. But of course, the true question is, can Cinderella convince her stepmother to allow her to come as well? So this film is, of course, a retelling of the original book Cinderella, which, if you've never read it before, it gets really dark. Cinderella was the first huge hit that Disney had since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out in 1937. It was also the first full length feature after wartime cutbacks. This movie is oftenly considered the beginning and end of Disney eras. Things also could have been very different, as at the time Walt Disney was trying to decide which film to release first, Cinderella or Alice in Wonderland. Both were made at the same time, and whichever one was completed first would be the one to release first, and of course that ended up being Cinderella. So when it came to bringing the character of Cinderella to life, there were a few people involved with that. For instance, Walt Disney wanted her character to resemble Ingrid Bergman. The live action model for the character was Helene Stanley, who would also come back to model for Aurora in Sleeping Beauty and Anita in 101 Dalmatians. As for the voice of Cinderella, this was done by Eileen Woods, who actually beat out 309 other girls for the role. Two of the more recognizable names of that list were Dinah Shore and Deanna Durbin. In the film, the prince is never actually called Prince Charming or even given a name. The character of the prince, by the way, also originally had a larger role. He even had a scene where he was deer hunting, but as it would turn out, he and the deer were friends and just playing a game together. This would then establish him as an animal lover. The model for the prince was Jeffrey Stone. Mike Douglas auditioned for the role of the prince. They loved his singing voice, but didn't like his Midwestern accent when he was speaking. So, he would then end up being the one who sang for the prince, but it was William Phipps who voiced him. When it came to the character of Lady Tremaine, Walt Disney told his animators to create her as if Joan Crawford had gone mad. Eleanor Audley was the voice and live action model of Lady Tremaine. She would also come back to do the voice and modeling for another Disney villain, Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. The voice of the fairy godmother would be done by Verna Felton, who would go on to do quite a few voices throughout Disney films. There briefly is a narrator for Cinderella, and it was done by Betty Lou Gerson, who would later on go to voice Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians. James MacDonald performed the voices for Jock, Gus, and Bruno. At the time of this movie, he was very well known as the voice of Mickey Mouse and Pluto. The voice, or at least the sounds, for the character of Lucifer were done by June Foray, who would actually do voice acting for a good majority of her life. Lucifer was modeled after animator Ward Kimball's cat. He had a plump, six-toed calico named Feetsy. The song Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo became a huge success for Disney, so much so that they still use the song throughout the parks. With the song Sing Sweet Nightingale, Disney pioneered double-tracked vocals, which wouldn't be widely used until the 1960s. The original plan in the film was to actually have all of the animals able to speak. Major the horse even had a song called Horse Sense that he sang to Bruno after Bruno tried to attack Lucifer. The transition from ripped dress to ball gown is considered Walt Disney's favorite piece of animation. The use of live action scenes being animated over was heavily used throughout this film to keep animation costs down. Did you happen to notice that throughout the film, Cinderella loses her shoe 3 times? The first time when delivering food trays to her stepsisters and stepmother. The next time is at the ball, which pretty much everyone knows about. And the last time is on her wedding day. Speaking of her shoes, the glass slippers were actually an error that was added in and not from the original story. In that original story, there was a French word used to describe the shoes, which was vert. This was an antiquated word that was used to describe fur, as it is believed that the fairy godmother changed squirrels into her slippers. Now, the translator for this film thought that it was actually the word verre that was used, which is a French word for glass. When the king and the Grand Duke fall from the chandelier, you can audibly hear a goofy holler. The palace in this film was based off of Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, Germany. The same castle was used for Sleeping Beauty. Now, as you've probably figured out from some of the things I've said, the movie does technically take place in France, even though no one has an accent. This film was not the first time that Disney would use Cinderella as a character. In 1922, they did a short where it took place, at least at that time, in a modern era. Cinderella does in fact have 2 direct-to-video sequels. There was also the 2015 live-action remake. I also have a random question for everyone out there, as I feel like when it comes to topics like this, it's not brought up as often. For instance, I feel like everyone at some point might be asked who their first James Bond was, or who their first Doctor Who was. But I'm just curious, who was your first Disney princess? Because for me, it was Cinderella. I'm also pretty certain that this was the first Disney VHS that my parents purchased for me. So when it comes to the film Cinderella, I really love this movie, not only because it was one of my first Disney films, but it still stands the test of time. It still has a good story, it's still fun to watch, it's great to watch with your family, and one of my favorite things about it is that Lady Tremaine, at least in my opinion, is probably the greatest Disney villain, because her whole reason of doing what she does is literally just to be cruel. She really doesn't get any power or wealth or anything out of it, she's just mean. So I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 5. And now it's time to answer the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. Cinderella is the one who names the mice, but when she names Gus, this is just a nickname. What is the actual name she gives him? So even though she gives him the nickname of Gus, she originally calls him Octavius. There's a reason for this. The writers are actually making a historical joke. When Octavius Caesar came into power, he gained the name Augustus, meaning lofty or serene. And so, because he was Augustus, that's why it's a joke of his nickname being Gus. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. And if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.